Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. College football semifinals inching ever so close. We're here to break down the two big games. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get rolling on this fine Tuesday morning, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, FanDuel.com. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of all the great promotions that FanDuel has available to new users. $1,000 risk-free bets, $100 referrals for bringing friends over as well. And that doesn't include some of the enhanced odds product that you'll find available for all the National Football League games from now until they hand out the Lombardi Trophy in early February. And Payne, I know you've missed talking college football, so you're getting a bit nostalgic as this is the last fully dedicated college show of the 2021 season.
Very sad times. I don't know how I'll survive, but I'm going to do my best to be emotionally strong, and we'll deliver a great product here for a loyal listener.
That's all we ask is you go out there, you put your best foot forward. We're glad to see you didn't opt out of the bowl season like we've seen all across the college football landscape. So 2 big games on the horizon, and you know what? The hell with everything else. Let's dive right into them, and let's kick things off with the early game on New Year's Eve. That'll feature...
That is, for our listeners, by the way, that is code for a bowl game starting in about an hour. And
that is not code for...
Todd would like to watch that.
I can watch
so
that anyways.
I
can watch that anyways. I have the great ability to multitask, albeit getting a little bit distracted all at once. And I'm not going to kid you. Houston and Auburn, not exactly what I would define as must-see TV by any stretch of the imagination. I figured, we're going to do such an intense deep dive here that, we're going to have 2.5 hours of content that we may as well get out of the gates quickly, right?
No, it's not going to be that long. Forewarning. I think we can get in and out of here in about 40 minutes.
Okay.
That'll be the
I appreciate impressive. I applaud and appreciate impressive and aggressive endeavors. So, all right, Alabama, 13.5-point favorites as they'll take on the Cincinnati Bearcats. Total in this game at 57.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And when you look at some of the numbers here, double-digit favorites in the college football playoff, 6-0 straight up, 4-2 against the number. This Cincinnati team in 2021, probably not as good as the 2020 edition. We'll get to that. First meeting between these two schools since 1990, and when you look at their seasons in a nutshell, Cincinnati, the only undefeated team in college football, finishing 13-0 straight up, 8-5 against the number, going 7-6 to the under in their 13 games this season. The Bearcats, 22-1 the last 23 games they've played as a program. Their only loss came against Georgia last year in the Peach Bowl. The Bearcats, well, they'll enter this game as the largest underdog as a 10-win team since Nebraska caught 16.5 points against your beloved number 1 ranked Florida State Seminoles back in 1993, a game Florida State escaped 18-16. Meanwhile, Alabama on the other side, 12-1 straight up, 7-6 against the spread this year, 7-5-1 to the under, making their 7th appearance in the 8-year history of the college football playoff. Number 1 seed for the 5th time, obviously 3-time national champions. And they've won their last 5 semifinal games, Payne, by an average of 20-plus points, outscoring the likes of Michigan State, Washington, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame by a total of 89-27 in the first half. I give you all of that information to set the table for what I think on paper could be a somewhat one-sided affair.
It's very possible. Now, I will start by saying the number, like a touch inflated. I was just looking this morning. We're at like 12.8 on the game. So that said, I'm not quite sure I'm running to take Cincinnati. There was a couple rogue numbers. I don't know if you saw it open. And it was a long time ago. Geez, how long ago did this game open? Like 4 weeks ago? There was a spot or two that opened above 2 touchdowns, and I certainly wasn't running to take those. And so just you start to dig into this matchup a little bit, and I don't really see anything here for Cincinnati that would be like, hey, there's an advantage here. And I just couldn't come across it. And I know we talked a little bit off air about Cincinnati's offense, so I think that's probably the best place to start here. And yeah, I've watched a couple of their games this season, dug into some of the numbers, went back and actually watched a couple games over the last few weeks. And the more I dig in, I guess, to me, it's more of a byproduct of the coordinator. Like, I started to really respect Mike Denbrock. Like, it was pretty interesting what he was doing schematically. Like, since he doesn't have the most talent on offense, the weapons, far from outstanding, right? And I know they've kind of enhanced some of their receivers via the transfer portal this offseason, but I don't see much, right? And what I came down to seeing is like Denbrock just really mixing it up and keeping defenses on their toes. Just runs a ton of different stuff, right? It's a good amount of RPO concepts. Then he hits you with some spread attack stuff, which he does on about 30% of snaps. And then he will mix in some like heavy sets with 12 and 13 personnel. And then he doesn't really tip his hand to what he's going to do. It's very balanced with run-pass splits and non-garbage time. It's 50-50 to be exact. And he does a really good job using pre-snap motion. Right, on runs, it's like 43% pre-snap motion. On passes, it's like 37% pre-snap motion. He does a really good job scheming to opponent each and every game, which we like to see from our coaches, obviously. And then when I see Cincinnati, they throw on first down a decent amount, but when he has Ritter throw on first down, nearly 50% play action. And that's what we like to see as well. And that is really where a bulk of Cincinnati's explosiveness comes from, is those first down play action passes. The problem is, if that first down tendency breaking RPO or play action pass doesn't work against Alabama, then there's going to be a lot of third downs and there's going to be a lot of known passing situations. And that's where Cincinnati has some trouble. They're 68th in the country in passing down sack rate allowed. Their offensive line, to me, is the weakness of the offense, both in run blocking and in pass protection. And you really start to dig into some of these numbers. And I just looked at Cincinnati's 4 toughest games this season because I think that's probably the best way to approach this when you're talking about a G5 going up against an SEC team. And I understand we've talked about it a couple times this year on why Cincinnati should be included in the Final Four, because they didn't really stub their toe when they faced Georgia in the bowl game last year. Let's call a spade a spade. Georgia really didn't give a shit about that game. This takes on a vastly different mindset and approach, I think, for Alabama. So I thought it was very important to kind of just look at the best opponents on Cincinnati's schedule, and there was really 4 tough games. And if you look at those games, Cincinnati had a 22% 3-and-out rate. And I don't see a situation where Cincinnati is going to be able to run here. I mean, Alabama's 2nd in defensive line yards, 7th in opportunity rate allowed, 10th in stuff rate. They're 3rd in the country in EPA per rush allowed. So this feels very much like a Desmond Ridder game. And I think my concern is we're going to find out some of the deficiencies that Desmond Ridder has. And it's great, right? Like, he's mobile. We know he's got this rocket arm. He's got great size. He's got a nice frame. He's going to be drafted quite high. But there's still some accuracy questions, especially from clean pockets, when you actually look at the ball placement accuracy. Right, not some of the adjusted accuracy stuff. Actual ball placement, it's below average. And then when you look at Desmond Ridder on 3rd down against his 4 toughest opponents, he's been tragically bad. And if you weight his performance against his 4 toughest opponents again, they'd be an equivalent to like an average SEC defense. And Ridder would have the worst accuracy on 3rd down in the entire SEC. So that is somewhat concerning to me here. Denbrock has done a fantastic job. He's going to need to do a really good job here with 3-4 weeks to prepare to find some weaknesses of Alabama. I just don't see a situation where they're able to run the ball, and it becomes a game where Desmond Ridder is going to have to play the game of his life. He's going to have to play well within the confines of the pocket. And then, of course, his ability as a mobile runner with big arm, he's going to have to make some plays outside the pocket with his legs and some plays downfield on unscripted stuff when the play breaks down. That's possibly the way Cincinnati's able to move the ball here. But I don't see them having a ton of great success offensively, Todd. I think the talent deficiency is is pretty staggering on this side of the
Yeah,
ball.
I mean, it's definitely an issue. And you talk about Desmond Ritter's legs playing a prominent role. You do wonder in this kind of spot if there'll be actually some designed runs as well to take off. And you look at Ritter's numbers that he's put forth this season from a raw number standpoint, top 10 in yards, top 10 in yards per attempt, 30 touchdown passes, has him 6th in the country, and his quarterback rating is 3rd in the nation at 165. But you highlighted the key deficiency, and it comes on 3rd down where he completes just 44% of his tosses. He's not thrown a score on 3rd and long all season and has generated just 2 explosive passing plays of 25-plus yards on 3rd down. And to your point, Payne, his passer rating drops a full 60 points overall when 3rd down arrives. And as we've seen,
Wow.
Bryce Young raises his level of play in the money downs. Desmond Ridder is going to have to try and match him because Ridder leaning on guys like Alec Pierce and Jerome Ford, a far cry from some of the playmakers that Alabama has on the other side. And to your point, the likes of Will Anderson, amongst others, you have playmakers on every level of this Alabama defense that are going to make life difficult. And I don't think there's any game breaker that you really get scared about that Cincinnati can throw at you and worry about him hitting a home run every time he gets into the open field.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And so that becomes the ultimate question. If you're not efficient running it, which we don't think Cincinnati's going to be, you're going to have to figure out how to hit some plays on early downs through the air, because if you're backed up in 2nd and 8, you're backed up in 3rd and 5+, the metrics indicate that you're not going to fare very well here if you have a Cincinnati ticket in your hand. That's the way Cincinnati stays within this game, is if they're doing things efficiently through the air on early downs. And again, it's Nick Saban with a month to prepare. I'm sure he's going to sniff that out. We know Alabama has the most analysts in the entire country just digging into this stuff. And so I don't see a situation where you're going to find success with Ford on the ground here. I don't see a situation where your offensive line is going to be able to hold up in some of these known passing situations, especially with Will Anderson, as you mentioned. And I don't see a situation unless Desmond Ridder has one of those games, right, that just kind of puts him on the map and he is efficient within the pocket and he's accurate within the pocket. And on 3rd down, he's making Alabama pay. I haven't seen that this year against lesser foes.
You know, for all the questions we have there, clearly Alabama's defense is a little bit more battle-tested than Cincinnati's offense. I think the matchup on the other side of the ball, at least for me, appears to be slightly more fascinating. You, of course, have the Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young, an Alabama offense that comes into the game 4th best in the FBS, averaging more than 42 points per game. They're 10th in yards per play. I mean, and we can go on and on about Bryce Young, but the reality of it is the big question facing Alabama is how much does the passing game lose without John Mechie? 96 catches with over 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Very difficult to replace for the likes of Holden, Baker, and Brooks that theoretically would be the next in line. We know Jamison Williams is out there, and he's a big play waiting to happen, but at the same time, Williams doesn't become that guy moving the sticks on 3rd and short and 3rd and intermediate, and in steps the Cincinnati Bearcat defense. While they may be a little bit vulnerable up front in the trenches, Payne, they're very good at linebacker, and they're outstanding in its defensive backfield.
I completely agree. The more fascinating matchup, or the more even matchup you would think, is this side of the ball. And, you know, there's a lot of perception in this. You know, it's like Bryce Young is a Heisman winner, and he's coming off a game where we all watched him shred Kirby Smart's secondary. And, you know, now he's going against one of our favorite secondaries in college football with Cincinnati. So it's strength on strength. And I think Sauce Gardner against Jamison Williams is probably appointment television. I think we've mentioned this a few times that we've broken down Cincinnati in some of their more meaningful games, and it's that their 3 best players by grade this season are all in the secondary. You have Kobe Bryant, that one.
I was waiting for that one.
and Brian Cook. So you have 2 elite corners and an elite safety. And I know they gave up a touchdown to Dell in the against Houston, and then they gave up a long explosive to him as well late in that game. But just on the season, that trio's been targeted 140 times. 48% of those targets have been caught. That's it. They're allowing 5.25 yards per reception, 7 picks, 3 touchdowns allowed, and a 51 passer rating allowed. Like, those 3 guys in Cincinnati secondary are as good as it gets. Now, obviously, step up in class, but we have seen Alabama's offense struggle at times. It's like we're all remembering the Georgia game, and it's like, struggle city against Auburn's secondary. And you mentioned the loss of John Mechie. I think that is enormous. We know Jameson Williams is a deep threat. He's a burner. He's likely a first-round pick. But Mechie's kind of the underneath guy, right? He can run routes. He's an elite blocker, 2.4 yards per route run. He kind of feels like the security blanket for Bryce Young at times. Who's going to emerge in that role, right? Maybe it's Ajayi Hall, who is uber talented, but been in Saban's doghouse all season. I remember watching him in the spring game, and I'm like, cannot believe that guy's a freshman. Absolutely electric. My understanding is he's been getting more burn at practice the last few weeks. Maybe he's the guy. We know he's talented enough, but do they trust him in this spot in the biggest game of the year? I'm not sure. Cincinnati does have somewhat of a balanced defense, as you kind of mentioned. If you look at their EPA per play, defending runs and passes, both are top 10. I think Cincinnati has really dominated offenses this season, especially ones that, they're superior to. They've created some short fields. They've created turnovers. I don't think either of those are going to come into play in this matchup just based on it. Obviously, Bryce Young's the best player on the field, right? And he's going to be asked to make some plays. My vibe is, though, that we're going to see more running than people would expect after watching Bama versus Georgia. That's just kind of the feel I get of this. Alabama's O-line and running backs are healthy. When I look at the progression Alabama's made along the offensive line this season, they've basically gone from, one of the more questionable offensive line units to one of the better ones, especially as run blockers. And I think with a month off, that young O-line is only going to get better. Like, it would not shock me at all that they look like a drastically different offensive line than we saw towards the latter part of the season. I mean, it just feels like Saban in this spot calls out his guys, and they morph into the more physical team. We saw it against Notre Dame in this spot last year. And you look at Cincinnati, they don't have a guy that actually weighs more than 290 pounds along the D-line. And those are like program numbers. I'd love to see what they actually weigh if we were able to weigh them out, right? Like, the program is typically going to boost these guys up a little bit. And again, I've really tried my best incorporating the 4 toughest games on Cincinnati's schedule to compare it to an SEC-type schedule. But you look, none of the teams that were really elite on Cincinnati's schedule were efficient running teams. I mean, Houston and Indiana can't run a lick. Notre Dame, by their standards, couldn't run the ball this season. And you faced them the first week of October when they had injuries along the O-line and their young guys were kind of still learning the ropes. My feeling is that a healthy Brian Robinson Jr., who's got a 40% broken tackle rate, is going to have success here, Todd. And I get the vibe that this is going to be a little bit more of a physical game for Alabama than like the dainty pass attack that we saw against Georgia. They smartly attacked Georgia's deficiencies. They looked at the film and said, hey, we're going to attack weakness. We're not going to just run into the brick wall. That just feels a little bit different here in this matchup. I think the other thing that's somewhat interesting, we mentioned at the top about not really seeing any edges here for Cincinnati. And people look back and be like, hey, no shit, like G5 against Alabama, like the line's 13.5 for a reason. But even within that, right, like the special teams edge for Alabama is pretty large. Cincinnati right now, 77th in special teams efficiency. Alabama's top 20. If you look at Cincinnati, they don't really have a field goal kicker that they can rely on.
42%.
Attempted.
He's made 42% of his kicks this season.
Yeah, they've attempted 17 field goals on the season. Made 10 of them. Right now, if you look at EPA numbers, Cincinnati's missed more than 18 points over expectation on field goals this season. So you're kind of just like looking for an element in this game, and you can't find one. And so, like, again, that is the very reason why, like, we made this game like closer to 12.5. And again, when it was the couple spots opened above 2 touchdowns, like, I didn't grab it. And it's because of the matchups here. Yeah,
a couple of things. I mean, you mentioned Brian Robinson. I mean, he took on a much heavier workload down the stretch. 59 carries over the final 3 games for 248 yards, and that included the soft tissue injury that you mentioned. We weren't even sure if he was going to be able to go against Georgia. And when you look at Robinson's numbers, the down that he's been most efficient on this season, has been first. He averages nearly 6 yards per carry in those spots. And talking about Cincinnati, Payne, how there's a little bit of a dichotomy against good teams and bad. I'm not going to scoff at forcing 11 turnovers in 7 games like Cincinnati did against teams with winning records, but they did most of their damage defensively, creating short fields against some of the inferior foes. 22 turnovers in 6 games versus teams with losing records. The 11 came in 7 games with teams with winning records. And to Cincinnati's credit, the one area that they are actually decent on special teams-wise is blocking kicks. I have to imagine that will not be lost on Nick Saban, and you won't see block field goals and block punts in abundance for the Bearcats to create a short field or any of those momentum-changing plays. As far as the number, Payne, I mean, you talked about where you guys made it versus where the market opened. Do we think this gets to 14 just because there's going to be an onslaught of public money, or do you think sharper books are going to go, hey, look, we're not going to give professional bettors that may want a number grab the opportunity to get 2 full touchdowns?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure where this heads, and again, haven't really looked at bet splits yet either. I'm not sure where this heads from here. I think this is probably a pretty clean number at 13.5. I think that's probably where I would put it if I was running a book that offered massive limits. I don't necessarily want to give someone the 14, knowing that we made it like closer to 12.5, but matchups obviously matter. I also don't know if there's a situation here, and I think you mentioned it at the top. 6-0 straight up, 4-2 against the spread. Did you say something like that with favorites in the college football?
Yeah,
playoff?
with double-digit
typically
favorites.
Yeah. Okay, and that's interesting because there is this mindset that there's no reason for style points. There's no reason to run it up, but I guess there's a large enough dichotomy in talent that doesn't necessarily matter. I don't know where this is going to head. It's one of the few times that I'm a little hesitant to say where this line's going to go. I just haven't heard anything on this game in terms of the side. I just haven't. So I don't know where it's going to head.
No, it makes, hey, look, we're transparent about the information we get, where we think these numbers are going to go, and rather than throw out some conjecture, we keep ourselves separated from the rest of the pack, obviously, by sharing known commodities versus simply guesswork. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you follow Payne on Twitter, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast, at Bet the Board Pod, for all of your great information. And as a holiday gift to us, we'd love if you guys could go to Apple Podcasts, rate, review, subscribe. 5-star reviews, always appreciated. Helps the algorithm and gets this podcast in front of more like-minded individuals. To the nightcap, Payne, a game that'll be played right in your neck of the woods between Georgia and Michigan. It's the Bulldogs, a 7.5-point favorite. Total on the game, 45 at FanDuel Sportsbook, and this will mark the first meeting between these schools since 1965 and only the second time ever for 2 blue blood programs to do battle. A little bit surprising when you consider that Georgia and Michigan have a lot of bowl tie-ins as far as the SEC Big Ten. That's only the second time that they'll lock horns on the football field. Michigan, first team to make the college football playoff after being unranked in the preseason. They're seeking their first national title since 1997 after winning their first outright conference crown since 2003 and putting their first 12-win season on the book since 1997 so far this year. Georgia, they make their second trip into the college football playoff. They, of course, are seeking their first national title since 1980, and it's Michigan with the best ATS record in the country this year, going in 11-2 where it matters. Since losing to Michigan State, the Wolverines 5-0 straight up and against the number and have outscored their opposition by more than 24 points per game. Michigan 2-0 straight up as a dog this year. Interesting note, considering that Coach Harbaugh 0-12 straight up in that role prior to 2021, although the last 3 bowl games against SEC teams have all been losses by 7 points or more. And I guess, Payne, the first overarching question on this game, the public always remembers what they saw last, and that was, of course, Georgia getting drummed by the Alabama Crimson Tide. Bounce back performance for Georgia coming in this spot, or reasons to be concerned because they were exposed in that SEC title game loss?
Yeah, I think it's probably hard for a lot of bettors to shake what their eyes have seen recently, right? And bettors saw Michigan get over the hump and slay the Ohio State Dragon, and those demons are gone for now. And then Michigan followed that up by pummeling Iowa, whose perception was never as good as reality all season long. And then you have Georgia, to your point, on the other hand. They go out and they get beat pretty handily by an Alabama team that didn't look great down the stretch. And suddenly, like, out comes the See, I told you Georgia hadn't played anybody proud.
The ones that are waiting under a rock for 2.5 months, waiting for that one data point that validates all of their preconceptions.
And then you have on the surface, right? Like, sure, he's saying all the right things. He wants to finish the job the right way. He wants to win a national championship because that's going to be a feather in his cap as well. But Dan Lanning, right, has one foot out the door. He's took the Oregon job. And so you add it all up, and Michigan's the public underdog here. Now, we make this game like 7.3. It's fluctuated above the key since open. There's no need, again, to do anything more than just win. Style points aren't really needed here. I can see how taking the points is attractive when the style isn't really needed and the game has a total in the mid-40s and you have two defensive-minded coaches and both want to run the ball. But despite what the forward-facing line is kind of doing here, Todd, I've seen Georgia come in off the screen from multiple respected bettors.
And it makes some sense. I mean, when you consider some of the matchups here, you have to ask yourself this question, and maybe this is the best place to start, Payne. Georgia's strength all year had been its ability to stop the run and make teams one-dimensional. We had questions aplenty about Georgia's secondary, and to Alabama's credit, they came out, they attacked in space. Jamison Williams went absolutely bonkers. But you look at Michigan and the strength of this football team. It's Hassan Haskins. It's Blake Corum. It's the need and desire of Coach Harbaugh and Josh Gaddis to establish a physically imposing ground game. If Michigan can't run the football effectively and efficiently, and let's be honest, when they stepped up against a top 10 run defense earlier this year, they struggled mightily against Wisconsin, but were able to create short fields and take advantage. Can Cade McNamara and this Michigan receiving core do anything close to what Alabama was able to do against this Georgia secondary?
Those two are not alike. So, it's interesting, right? And I don't think Michigan's going to abandon who they are, right? We've heard in pressers this week, Haskins has come out and said, like, hey, we're going to be who we are. And I don't know I understand you have a month off, right? So you can make some adjustments, you can throw in some wrinkles, you can do some different things and provide different elements that haven't been on film yet. But at its core, Michigan's going to rely on its O-line. It's going to rely on its run game. It's not going to put a ton on Cade McNamara's plate. And ultimately, I think that's what this comes down to. It's like, can Michigan do to Georgia what they've done to other defensive lines and play some bully ball? I like Michigan's offensive line. But you hit it perfectly in that it didn't really work against Wisconsin's defensive front. And I know people will probably go and see the score now as I say that, and they're like, one on the road by 3 scores. The reality is, if you look at it, Haskins, Corum, and Edwards averaged 2.7 a carry on 35 carries combined. And what was shocking to me in digging into this game was Michigan's O-line 68th in opportunity rate for as good as the run game has been. And that's basically a metric that measures the amount of times a run play gains at least 4 yards when the line creates 4 yards of space. Stunning to see them below average. That's obviously pretty important when we're talking about a Michigan offense that runs on 61% of early downs. Like, that's who they are. So even if they decided to be like, hey, we're going to open this up a little bit more, probably not going to be a ton of passing, And then you have this Georgia defense that we know, 8th in schedule-adjusted EPA per rush allowed. In total, less than 29% of runs against Georgia have graded successful. If you look prior to the Alabama game, Georgia's defense was giving up 0.36 non-garbage time points per drive. Georgia gave up 8 regular season touchdowns this year. Even in that game against Alabama, like Trey Sanders and Brian Robinson Jr. did nothing on the ground. It was Bryce Young's legs that made the rushing numbers respectable. I believe it was like 1.4 EPA per rush for Bryce Young. The other 2 running backs were negative EPA per rush. And then if you look at the success Michigan's had running the ball recently, it's tons of inside zone, right? It's very difficult to run inside against Georgia and Jordan Davis, right? And you also have great run defenders in Jalen Carter and Devontae Wyatt. The way Alabama, right, was able to beat Georgia, it's like having a Heisman quarterback and a potential, number 1 pick in 2023 throwing to a first-round receiver in Jamison Williams and pushing the ball downfield. Like, Cade McNamara isn't that guy, and Michigan doesn't really have that kind of weaponry outside once Bell went down. And this is really interesting to me, and it kind of gauges some of the receiver talent. And I'm sure there's some young guys like Michigan, we're recruiting better. I'm sure you are, but like the young guys aren't quite there yet to impact a game like this. And you can tell by this number. Michigan's receivers have only caught 35% of their contested catches. As many question marks as we have about Georgia's receivers, 62% contested catch rate. Like, it's not a very good pass-catching offense right now. It's very bleak in its current state. I think if you're Josh Gaddis.
J.J. McCarthy time, baby. That's what Michigan's got to lean on in this game, a little trickeration and such.
Yes. Yeah, you're probably right. I think if you're Michigan and you're Josh Gaddis, like, you're kind of throwing on the tape and you're seeing that, in addition to a couple deep shots and making young corners kind of play on islands, Alabama was able to attack the slot in Georgia secondary, right? 16.8 yards allowed per reception on 10 catches with a touchdown. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was disciplinary, but Latavius Brinney, who plays the star position in Georgia's defense and has an 82 coverage grade, the best of any player in Georgia secondary, was benched for the Alabama game. Didn't record a single snap. No reasons were given other than Brinney was a healthy scratch. His replacement, William Poole, was targeted 10 times. Bryce Young had a 141 passer rating when targeting Poole. 8 of those 10 targets were caught, including 1 for a touchdown. So your guess is as good as mine. If Brinney is maybe injured, maybe if he's in the doghouse, I don't know, but it'd obviously be good if he played in this game because he plays the star position and he's one of the best coverage guys defending the slot. If he's in there, based upon his productivity this year, that's probably not an attackable area, although it appears to be one if you watched film from the last game. Let's see if Brinney's in the doghouse. Chris Smith, another key cog in Georgia secondary, hadn't played since the Tennessee game because of a knee injury. He returned against Bama at far less than 100%. He's now going to have another 4 weeks to rehab his knee. Let's see if that helps. But as I see this, right, unless Michigan's able to shock us all and bully Georgia's front, probably going to need Donovan Edwards to be a factor catching balls out of the backfield. Maybe you even do line him up in the slot. All signs from South Florida here are that he has been an integral part during practice over the last week. We'll see what that means. I don't know. But that's what I am hearing and what my guys have seen. Josh Gaddis, to your point, probably going to have to pull some things out of his bag and dial up a couple trick plays. We saw a few against Wisconsin. Michigan actually has the most expected points added from trick plays in all of college football this season, so it has been a part of their offense. And I think the other way Michigan might have success offensively is if Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart get too anxious on defense, right? If they're too aggressive. The very best part of Cade McNamara's game this season has been when he's blitzed. He naturally wants to get the ball out quick. And so you only help him when you blitz him. On the season, McNamara has a 131 passer rating when blitzed, 10 touchdowns, not a single turnover-worthy throw all season. His adjusted completion percentage, over 75%, and his A-dot approach is 12 yards per attempt. He beat Wisconsin badly when Jim Leonard sent blitzes, and Leonard sent blitzes almost 37% of the time. And I bring that up because once Kirby figured out his corners couldn't hang with Bama, he started sending a ton of blitzes in the second half. I'm not sure his corners are going to have the issues they had in the Bama game, but I think it's really important to not give Michigan fake yardage here. You have to kind of stay within yourself, and I understand if you want to be aggressive, but I don't think it makes sense in certain situations for Kirby and Lanning to get too nutty and aggressive defensively here because that's just going to open things up.
I think you have to let Michigan prove that they can drive the football down the field methodically. And you mentioned that Wisconsin game. The reality of it was Michigan had one scoring drive that traveled more than 59 yards in that game, and that was the elite level defense they'd played. They weren't able to run the football. They stayed committed to it. 44 carries for 112 yards in that spot. Now, at least Michigan, to your point, you brought up one of the X factors that I think we're going to see him get more involved in the offense in Donovan Edwards. Blake Corum has said the right things about being healthy. We saw the big play potential against Iowa. So Michigan will at least be healthier in the backfield than they were down the stretch. We'll see if that can pay dividends here. On the other side of the ball, all the questions swirling around your beloved fan club that you lead for Stetson Bennett. And will he be up to the task against this Michigan defense? When you look at Stetson Bennett, he's had loads of protection all season long. fourth lowest sack rate in all of the FBS. And to Stetson's credit, he led the Power 5 in yards per attempt. He was top 15 in touchdown passes, second in the Power 5 in first down per attempt. In steps a Michigan defense headlined by Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo. Those two combined for 25-plus sacks this season. And the best opponent they faced was Ohio State. And to Michigan's credit, they made the Buckeyes somewhat one-dimensional. Georgia doesn't have explosive game breakers, not by what I've seen and what the numbers suggest in the backfield, but they do have some of that physicality you need in the offensive line and enough balance to hopefully put Michigan in a little bit of a precarious position if things get rolling.
Yeah. To me, this side of the ball is pretty straightforward. Like, Georgia's going to be who they are. And I think that's a run-first team. And when they're not running it, they're throwing with play action, and they're working the RPO game. And like most offenses, Georgia's functions substantially better when they're not playing from behind the down and distance and when they're playing with a lead. And I think Todd Monken's done a really nice job this season working with what he has. And you kind of are hinting at this, but as great as Kirby's recruited, the offense isn't really stocked like a trout pond that many believe it is.
It's Nick Saban before he came into the last 3 or 4 years, where all the efforts recruiting-wise were built around 5-star blue chippers on the defensive side and an offense you hoped could just get by with the likes of A.J. McCarron or Greg McElroy. I think Georgia's still a little bit behind there offensively. We'll see if they can bridge the gap, though.
There was a report this week that Arch Manning is trending that
Insane.
way. We'll see if you can bring in the best quarterback. Let's see what happens. But like, to your point, and I'm not trying to bring up Florida State here, but it's just the one situation that I know is that there's a receiver in the state of Florida who's a track star. He's like a 3-star guy. He does have talent and upside. But Mike Norvell, and specifically Ron Dugans, who didn't bring in a freshman receiving weapon into this class, elected not to bring in this 3-star track guy. Kirby Smart did. So they're not getting the offensive weapons that I think a lot of people think of when it's like, oh, Georgia, awesome. It's just not there right now. Great tight ends, huge offensive line, some nice backs, but the weapons outside are certainly lacking. And in general, right, like, this is a pretty basic offense, especially with Michigan having a month to prepare for it. But, right off the bat, the question becomes, can Michigan stop the run? And if you're a Wolverines fan, or you're maybe have a slight bias towards Michigan, or you're betting Michigan, you're thinking like, hell yeah, right? We held Ohio State to like a negative 0.16 EPA per rush, and Henderson and Williams did nothing against us. And I think when you bring in a new DC, which Michigan did, right, with Mike McDonald from the Ravens, some of the weighted performances probably should be factored in even more than usual, because you have like 18-year-old kids learning a drastically different scheme. And the more recent stuff should probably be more relevant. But it still makes me nervous as a whole if you look at Michigan's defense, 61st in line yards, outside the top 100 in stuff rate. And despite the entire world knowing Georgia wants to run, they still had an offensive line, top 20 in line yards, opportunity rate, and stuff rate allowed. So I think that's obviously the first step, is like, who wins the ground battle on this side of the matchup. The second thing to focus on as you watch this is Michigan's ability to defend play-action passes in the RPO game, especially on early downs. We talked about this leading up to the Alabama game, getting Stetson Bennett to throw on early downs, get him comfortable, right? Pass on rundowns, break tendency. Todd Monken's done a really good job with that. Over 51% of Stetson Bennett's throws this season are with play-action or an RPO element to it. And I think this will shock some people. But because of Georgia's ability to run, right, and the amount of times they do run, early down passes have been wildly efficient. Georgia's early down EPA passing is the best of any Power 5 team in the country this year. And when Stetson Bennett throws with play action, 127 passer rating, 77% adjusted completion percentage, 15-yard ADOT. And to kind of have that be more effective, you need to play in the lead, I think, or keep it in a neutral state. And I think that might actually present some issues for Michigan's defense, because if you look at how they've defended the play action in the RPO game, especially on early downs, they haven't done it. You need good coverage linebackers. Michigan doesn't have a linebacker with a positive coverage grade this season. Okay? And I think that might be where you see some success for Georgia early in this game. And maybe Mike McDonald has to make an adjustment, and I'm sure he's going to be preparing for it over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But as good as Michigan's defense has been, and they have made ridiculous year-over-year strides, especially in the secondary with virtually the same exact players, Michigan's allowed a 115 passer rating on play-action throws. If you only factor in Power 5 teams, Michigan's defense is outside the top 30 in EPA per pass allowed to play-action throws. Offenses are seeing more than a 2.5-yard increase per throw when using play-action against Michigan. And when we've broken down Michigan games recently, right, we've referenced the Nebraska matchup a few times, right? That's the one offense that was decent that they played in the regular season. They hung a decent amount of points, and they had a RPO-based system. Adrian Martinez, who just transferred out and has never played to the level we thought he would when he was recruited there, was a perfect 9 for 9 using play action against Michigan's defense. Those 9 passes averaged nearly 19.5 yards an attempt. 3 of them were touchdowns. I think that is an area of concern. I really do. And so when I look at this, the whole key is getting Stetson Bennett to throw in known passing situations. And that's kind of when he turns into a pumpkin. But if you can't stop the run or the early down play action passes or the RPO game on early downs, that's not going to be a thing. And so the way Michigan wins this side of the ball is obviously stopping the run and then getting Stetson Bennett to throw in known passing situations and getting your 2 first-round edge rushers after him. If you look in the 2 Alabama games, and I think that's probably the right equivalent to use here, Stetson Bennett, when trailing by a touchdown or more in those games, 37% passing success rate, averaging 3.3 yards per pass attempt on third down. It is very clear how you make Stetson Bennett in this Georgia offense uncomfortable. I'm just not sure Michigan's offense is going to allow the defense to play with the lead. I'm not sure if you can't stop the run or if you can't stop the first down play action passes, Bennett's going to be in a ton of uncomfortable situations. We'll see. I think that's ultimately what this comes down to. And the other interesting thing here, and I do think we'd probably do a bad job if we didn't mention it, is I've started to hear some rumblings over the last 36 hours or so that there's a real chance the leash is short on Stetson Bennett and JT Daniels could get some playing time here Friday.
Going to be interesting. I mean, JT hasn't thrown a meaningful pass in what feels like an eternity. We talked about it early in the year. We thought that Georgia's ceiling would be limited by Stetson Bennett and some of his decision-making potential, but every now and again, competition behind the scenes can force the players involved to raise their level of play. So let's see if Stetson Bennett can come out early, put together a scoring drive or two, to your point, force Michigan to play from behind the 8 ball. And who knows, maybe it's Stetson his mobility in the pocket that gives them a wrinkle that they can lean on as well. But there is no doubt this is a Georgia team that's had to hear about it over the last couple of weeks, how they were embarrassed by Alabama. Michigan is the team to beat. And if you probably took a straw poll of casual college football fans out there on the street, they'd be stunned to know that Georgia was a 7.5-point favorite. And I have to imagine sportsbooks are taking on a huge amount of liability as far as Michigan money line is concerned for the New Year's Eve nightcap.
I think you're spot on. It'll be interesting to see where this line goes, right? Because that is the night game on Friday. A lot of people are off work, and so it does take a different element in terms of being a bookmaker and figuring out where to put your line. Now, are you going to give professional bettors the 7 here? I can tell you again, I saw pretty early on when this line opened up on the buy, Georgia minus 6.5, heavy. And so it's going to be interesting. This does feel like a game where if someone can get out to a lead, it kind of snowballs a little bit, right? Because neither of these quarterbacks are going to be great in known passing situations, being forced to pass from behind. It does get that vibe to me where, who is ever able to maybe get out to an early lead is going to have a pretty dramatic advantage throughout.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, there are teams in college football that feel comfortable playing from behind. I wouldn't put Georgia and Michigan in that particular bucket by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll see exactly what we have here, maybe shaping up for an SEC title game rematch in the national title, or will we see a Cinderella emerge? To Cincinnati and Michigan's credit, both of them started the season with odds upwards of 100-1, if not greater. So the two biggest long shots we've ever seen get into the college football playoff. Previous long shots have not fared that well in the college football semifinals. We'll see if these two teams can potentially break the mold and do something different. I do want to ask you, Payne, real quick, and not to break any of these games down because we're not going to. Obviously, the uncertainty around other bowl games has changed the dynamic that we've taken on as far as previewing some of the bigger games on the schedule. Is there a game just as a college football fan that you want to watch involving teams not playing in the college football playoff?
I'm going to sound like the college football Grinch, but not really.
That's fair. No, it's a fair assessment.
I mean, I'm like so, and this is going to sound crazy, and I've sent these text messages to you. We've kind of gotten into the point of the season where there's another week in the NFL. It's like such a grind. If based upon the season we've had so far, and it's been a really bang-up season, both publicly and behind the scenes, that I would rather start my vacation now and just take off the next 6 weeks, especially with all the bullshit going on, right? Like COVID this, COVID that, it's becoming, when you sit there and spend hours handicapping a game and then it gets removed and you've, got a position on a game and you're in such a good spot. It's a kick in the dick when the game ultimately gets canceled, and it's quite frustrating.
I mean, we've talked about it.
I think Iowa State Clemson was one that was intriguing to me, but it's lost some of its luster when Iowa State's best defender and running back decides to opt out of that game, and Clemson's dealing with coordinator issues on both sides of the ball. That one was going to have some intrigue for me. I was looking forward to that one a little bit. I was honestly looking forward to Washington State and Miami. I thought I had a different vibe on that game compared to some of the market. But obviously, like both the college football championship games, I'm really looking forward to, right? I mean, both on Friday, I'm going to watch them both, and I think they're good matchups. Now, it might end up being a little chalky, but I think in general they'll be good games. I'm just kind of over this season in general. I've kind of got to that point where you kind of hit the wall, and you're just kind of navigating the board the best you can with the circumstances we're currently dealing with. And, just kind of hearing about it. It's like, just deliver the news. I don't need your bias involved in the news when you report the game's being canceled or who's potentially out of the games. Like, just deliver the news. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Unfortunately, the reality of the world we live in now is you can spend 3 to 4 hours at minimum breaking down these games, but the person that's going to be more effective in finding winners is the one that doesn't move from their desk, staring at the odds screen, knowing they have 30 to 45 seconds to react to any of the news as it breaks, whether it be in these college football bowl games or in the National Football League over the last couple of weeks.
Oh, that's the way to do it, too. And typically, why that's the right approach is because there's a domino effect, right? One guy typically ends up being 2 or 3. And we've kind of seen that. I mean, I'll be candid, like, let's just kind of be an open book here. And it's not necessarily just like the COVID situation either. I mean, there was a game that we were going to give out on this podcast. I think I sent you a text message 2 weeks ago from one of my guys that said, expect some stuff coming down with Ohio State. And then you sent me a list of games that you thought were going to be sharp, and Utah was on that. And Todd and I sat here and sat on our hands waiting so we could give this game out to you on the buy at 7. And then yesterday, the first domino, you texted me, fell with Garrett Wilson, and we immediately had to go. We couldn't hold it anymore. And so we took 7 on that game, and all of a sudden we wake up this morning, it's 4. And so it's just kind of been navigating this, and we tried to do our best to hold it for you guys, and it just we had to go. So that's, I think, some of the balancing act and gymnastics we've had to do behind the scenes this year for the listeners.
There is no doubt it's a challenge, and one that we can only hope when we do our next college football podcast to preview the 2022 season. All of this off-the-field nonsense is put behind us, and we can focus on the X's and O's, getting the best of the number and not being afraid to move on games on Tuesdays and Wednesdays like we used to do in the old days. But that's about the extent of the diatribe, and I think we highlighted a number of the key issues that we faced as bettors that do this professionally and try and get the best numbers and obviously share some of the best information that we have readily available. Obviously, a little bit more challenging with circumstances beyond our control. But we do have one final order of business. But before we get there, I want to encourage all of our loyal listeners, if you're in a state where FanDuel Sportsbook operates, FanDuel.com, /BetTheBoard or / whatever the hell they're using these days. Use the promo code BetTheBoard. Take advantage of your risk-free bets, your enhanced odds, everything that new users would want to build their bankroll for the remainder of bowl season just in time for the NFL playoff race. And Payne, best bet, probably the final one of the college football season. Where are you taking us this weekend, my friend?
It's shockingly one of the college football playoff finals. Just how we've kind of broken this game down. And again, it was probably a 20-minute breakdown, so you can go to the timestamp and listen to it. But I don't see Cincinnati's offense doing much here in this spot. And I think we will see a much more deliberate attack, I would say, with Alabama's offense being a little bit more run-focused than we last saw them. And I think there's some perception in this total because of how they went out and attacked Georgia's defense. I think John Mechie is a substantial loss. And I think this has the ability for Alabama, if they are in a lead, to kind of just play out the stretch and run the ball and play defense. So let's go with the under 58 in this game. I don't know how long it's going to last. I will say there are a couple shops in Vegas right now, Todd, that we have some access to that's delivering a 58.5. We'll probably grab those, and it'll be gone before the time this airs.
I was going to say, we might not have even wanted to say that because the likelihood those 58.5s will be there by this time this podcast widely circulates for those folks in Vegas.
Yes.
Probably slim to none, but we'll see.
But 58, I'm going to kind of put this out there again. Like, we'll give out under 58 because that is the widely available line. 58's a key number, okay? Games in college fall 58 like 2.9% of the time. Right now, it's like the fourth largest key number in college football. So that is the widely available line. I don't know how long it's going to last, but let's go with under 58 in Cincinnati, Bama.
And yes, folks, Payne is feeling perfectly okay. It's actually a full game under rather than the first half under you've grown accustomed to in the National Football League. So 58, the official play. That's how we'll grade it accordingly. And, time flies when you're having fun. College football, theoretically almost in the rearview mirror at this point. And I know you're going to be sad. You're going to sob yourself to sleep tonight being the college football junkie that you are over the last couple of years as we've slowly tried to convert you.
I look forward to college football, and maybe it's just because, right, we work from our home office, and so any football is good football at 11 a.m. and noon. And I probably have a greater appreciation for college football had there been games on throughout the week normally. That'd be fun to me. Nothing wrong with a little 11 a.m.
Hey,
football.
Maybe you can try and send a letter to the MAC commissioner and tell him Tuesday and Wednesday nights are great, but you know what's even better than that? Tuesday and Wednesday mornings in front of empty stadiums just throughout Ypsilanti, Kalamazoo, and some of the other finer places within the MAC conference that they play, on weeknights, at least during the month of November.
Monday morning Maction has a nice ring.
There you go. The T-shirts are already being printed, and they'll be ready to roll in time for the 2022 season. But I want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, who've been with us from the preseason when we broke down every Power 5 conference through the week-by-week journey, trials and tribulations, all part of what we do in this particular racket. Wish all of you, friends and family, a very happy and healthy new year. Enjoy the remainder of bowl season. Of course, we'll break down the national championship, but that'll be baked into an NFL podcast. So this is the last college football only show of the season. And come Friday evening with an Alabama and Cincinnati under ticket in hand, hopefully we'll see you at the window.